3 albums into Earthworks, and I was wondering what your objectives were when you formed the band, and 3 albums later, have you achieved those?
Well, I think your objective whenever you form a band is stay together, really, and to try to develop whatever it is your original blueprint was for the thing. And with Earthworks, we're pretty much on course. You know, we've played to a lot of people in a lot of countries now. The band's becoming pretty well known on the jazz festival circuit. So things looking pretty good.
What progression do you see the band having taken over 3 albums?
Well, I suppose when I first thought about it, you know, electronic drums and stuff, I think I imagined maybe that the band would be harder and more processed, perhaps more aggressive. In fact, we've opted for a kind of lighter, more airy type of sound. Not dense, quite friendly, quite user-friendly. Not aggressive, really. Quite rapid and light, I think of it as being, or gentle and light, which I quite like. That's the way the band developed organically, you know, and it's better to go with the flow than superimpose on something, you know, an artificial kind of plan, which would make it go a certain way. But you don't want to force people into things, I think. So we've opted for this kind of warm horns with a drum patches kind of burbling underneath and the bass underpinning that, usually upright bass.
Well, you used David Torn as co-producer on the latest album, and I was wondering what he added to the sound and the overall outcome of the album.
Well, David does a number of things. I mean, first of all, he makes you laugh. Secondly, he knew the German recording engineer. Thirdly, he has the musician's trust so that he's able to pick takes. On the All Heaven Broke Loose album, what you hear is, you know, 4 guys all playing at once, and you do 3 or 4 takes and pick one. You know, it's basically that kind of an album. Sonically, David is very good with looping devices and echoes and reverbs, that type of thing. And I could point you to Temple of the Winds on All Heaven Broke Loose, which is a trio track. Django Bates was unable to come to the studio that day. He had to be in south of France to receive an award, as he is always doing, as England's best young jazz composer of the year. And it's tough being in a band with the best young jazz composer of the year. He writes very well. So we were left with a trio that day in the studio, and we laid down a bed of kind of looped tenor saxophone parts, which instead of keyboard playing, which gave Iain Ballamy a springboard to improvise off. And that's where David comes in very handy in terms of the sound on the album.
How would you compare what you do with Earthworks to what you did with Bruford in the late 70s?
Well, I don't know. I'm kind of a pragmatic guy. You know, I do whatever comes up at the time. Looking back on it, I think, with my first band, Bruford, I just kind of thought it was rock without lyrics. You know, actually the term fusion wasn't really bandied around much at that time, you know. And I thought we were kind of a rock band with interesting meters, interesting sounds. And I had a sort of clanging rototom type drum kit at the time, and a genius of a soloist called Alan Holdsworth, who's one of my favorite guitar players. And I thought the band was very nice. The issue of whether it was rock or whether it was jazz never bothered me. You know, my whole career, everybody's been saying, ever since I started with Yes, it was always, well, is it rock? You know, and now with Earthworks, it's, well, is it jazz? And, you know, the musicians never care, and they don't really know either. You know, they just don't care that much. Yes, of course, Earthworks is jazz because large portions of it are improvised. And the spirit of the music is from jazz. But it has rock elements in it. Elements of other music as well.
Tell me about Splashy Note. Is it a spoof of dance music?
Well, perhaps a sideways glance. You know, it starts like that, but then it rapidly implodes into a kind of Cecil Taylor kind of rave up between piano and drums in the middle. And then out of that debris, it kind of reassembles itself. So it disassembles itself and then reassembles itself. It goes into a black hole in the middle, which you can take as a comment on dance music if you like, or not if you like. I mean, it's very prevalent, dance music. And I think jazz players should take on all the forms of the music of the day, really. You know, I think jazz has always been a great big stew, a great big mess of things. I think jazz musicians are commentating all the time on current popular forms. Jazz always used popular forms. Today it's hip-hop, dance, you know. So instead of now, where you might have Miles Davis tracks played with, hip hop kind of rhythm machines and things, we thought we'd do one and have it, as I say, explode in the middle and reassemble later, hence splashing out.
Tell me how a typical Earthworks tune comes out.
We don't actually play a whole lot, hanging. We don't have a big room that we're always playing in. Rehearsals are something that's complicated to get together. You've got to pay for rehearsal rooms, you've got to call musicians in. Usually we only rehearse something when something's pretty much written. Typically, a lot of tunes have started off my drum set, which is a very complicated thing, a hybrid drum set that plays half chords and half drums, allows me to access piano parts, that kind of thing. So I will configure something that sounds quasi-melodic and harmonically interesting and rhythmically interesting as a kind of scenario, like Pigalle, for example. It sounds slightly North African, slightly Moroccan, to start with, and you get a feel for that. The next thing you know, the keyboard is on some kind of a harmonium type squeeze box type of patch, and then you're thinking of France, and you're thinking of North Africa and France, and Pigalle, which is the red light area of Paris, where a lot of North Africans and Moroccans are. And then you look for a melody, which is going to be a sinewy, snaky type of slightly arabesque melody, and away you go. You have a tune called Pigalle. So we think quite cinematographically, but a lot of the pieces originate from this unusual drum set, which allows me to do these things, and it's really at the heart of Earthworks, I think.
So why no flashy drum solos in any of your albums?
Well, I'm not really a flashy drum soloist. I'm more, to me, music is a case of, is a cooperative sport, you do something and I'll do something with you, and together we make music. That's what has always excited me. It's a social, cooperative endeavor. 2 or 3 people playing at the same time, or more playing at the same time. Yes, of course, there are solos occasionally, and once in a while I burst into activity. And on our new live CD, which will be coming up in Christmas time or a little bit later, there's a longish solo on there which I really like a lot.
Well, you've done very impressive things with electronic percussion and the chordal drums. And I was wondering if you've ever considered doing a true solo album, or perhaps you trigger all the instruments through a drum kit.
Well, again, not really. I'm not that kind of lonely a guy. As I say, to me, music is to do with relationships between people, getting the right mix of people. That's, in a way, the art of the band leader, too, I think, is to not necessarily find, the leaders of the day on their instrument, but to find talent that can be molded into being the leaders of the day. So I'm asking people who join Earthworks to do in Earthworks the things they probably wouldn't do in any other group they're in, to take advantage of Earthworks as being a springboard for their wildest kind of fantasies and dreams, and to get specific and develop a specific vocabulary for the band, which will make the band eventually sound unique. It takes a while, it's a slow process, and you don't force it. But eventually they'll find they are playing in Earthworks in a way with a pair of ears that they don't really use on any other gig. And they'll be able to view Earthworks as a place they can grow and develop. And when they leave the band, if they leave the band, they will be different people to how they were when they went into it.
What new developments in the percussion world have you been fascinated with recently?
I'm a busy guy in the sense that I have to keep a band together and keep myself amused, and people in Ottawa amused at, at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So a lot of what I do is pragmatic in the sense that I need tunes now that have to do with me, and they come from my drums. I don't listen a whole lot to other drummers. People are always asking me about this or that latest kind of drum fad or that kind of drum technology or something. But surprisingly, maybe to you, but not surprisingly to me, I've got my hands full with something that I've got going. And all my ideas tend to get used in that. I never have a shortage of ideas. When I do, then I'll listen around a bit, I think. So I keep my eyes and ears open a bit. I listen to jazz and dance music and everything else like everybody does. But on the whole, I'm not short of material, and I'm not, right now, I haven't heard anything recently that, that particularly thrills me. But there probably is some tremendous stuff out there, but it's just I haven't come across it, because I spend a lot of time with this band, of course, and sometimes with Yes.
Electronic percussion is being a very desperately misunderstood type of instrument, and why don't you put it straight for everyone exactly what it is you do and how it's different to a drum machine in a nutshell?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, a drum machine is a machine. You know, you press a button and it starts. You press a button and the Michael Jackson show starts, or the Madonna show starts. It's all sequenced, what they call sequenced. So that the basic beats, and on those shows often the drummer will play just the cymbals or the loose stuff, the kind of stuff that doesn't matter. And the relentless beat is often sequenced, coming from a drum machine. What I do is quite different. Yes, I have an electronic drum set, and I have a computer on stage, but the computer is merely offering me a ton of sound at any particular time. It stores all this sound, and I can recall it very quickly. So if you come to tonight's concert, you'll hear, one way or another, briefly, you'll hear upwards of 40 or 50 percussion instruments. So first of all, the instrument allows me to access a million instruments. The computer allows me to access a million instruments, which can be assigned to pads. These pads can also have access to a keyboard and can trigger all kinds of chords and melodic figures as well. All that can be stored and recalled very quickly and shifted between programs. So it's just a huge percussion stroke keyboard thing. But the main point is that I play it with flesh and blood. You know, it's in real time, as we call it. It's not in a box which you press a button. So that is the big difference. You know, you say electronic drums and everybody says, oh, it's a drum machine. It's not a bit of a drum machine. It's a real live, breathing instrument, like an electric guitar.
Do you ever foresee yourself returning to an all-acoustic kit?
Oh, possibly. I've gone down this electronic road quite a bit since 1979, when I first started getting fascinated by the whole idea of melody in drums, you know, rhythmically melodic figures, things that keyboard players wouldn't do. And I've had some success with that, and through some of the King Crimson material, Waiting Man and things like that. I've been able to do a fair amount of that. Now, in about the mid-'80s, the machinery involved that I needed was so poor that I had a couple of years off and decided to wait until it got a bit better. And I formed an acoustic improvising duo with Patrick Moraz, and we actually came to Canada a fair bit. Patrick Moraz was an ex-Yes member, a pianist, and we used just piano and acoustic drums. By about 86, 87, the equipment had got much better, and it was possible to return to electronic drums and have it configured the way I've just described, with chords and all that stuff, and a million different digital samples, which are amazingly clean. And much better now. So I thought I'd give that as I'd have that as the basis for a group, and headhunt some of Britain's best young jazz talent, and say, look, you know, I'm going to do this kind of thrumming, strumming, drumming, blumming, thrumming thing on the drums here. And whatever happens, you guys will sound different when you play, because the backdrop behind you will be different. And that amused both Iain and Django, and here we are.
You said a few years back that you felt America's jazz scene was in a state of awful confusion. Do you think things have changed in the last few years?
Yeah, it's not really in confusion at all now. It's lost. Well, I don't know. I think, yeah, there's a lot of ambivalence around, a lot of confusion. There is some tremendous jazz talent, legitimate and kind of avant-garde or electronic. On the whole, the record companies have decided that the people don't need to hear that. So you're not going to hear that. You'll hear instead, you know, heavy metal and hard rock. And that's just the environment that people like me work in right now. We had all the audience's ears, you know, through the 70s and 80s, which is fine, and I'm quite sure in 10 years' time we'll have the audience's ears again. But these things are cyclical, you know. If you go to the Montreal Jazz Festival tomorrow night, you're going to hear some tremendous music, you know, from a lot of European musicians and great French-Canadian musicians and so on. But you're never going to hear it on the radio. It's so that has ever been the way, though, in jazz, hasn't it? Jazz is a relationship between the musician and the audience, and you know, the clubgoer. That's where the relationship is. It's not between the musician and the record company, as it is in rock, where the record company has successfully interplaced itself between the player and the audience. And it's the record company which now says, you can do this or you cannot do that. And I know of what I speak because I'm also in a big rock group called Yes, which has all these problems and more, twice as badly as I could ever describe to you.
How do you feel about the sickeningly sweet, syrupy, happy saxophone pop jazz that it represents jazz to North America these days?
Well, it's a bit of a problem, really, because North America has much more interesting stuff than that, and it's bubbling there. But it's very repressed, So America is very split, between guys who are still alive and want to play this stuff, and between a kind of an unhappy audience who doesn't really know this stuff exists. And of course, this all stems from a patronizing of the audience by businessmen. It is in their interests to ensure that they treat you like children, and that you're given only lollipops and McDonald's. Nothing wrong with lollipops and McDonald's and ice cream once in a while. I like that too. But as a whole diet, I'm not sure. I think the food analogy is quite good, Once in a while you want to eat something that's real, something that was grown in the earth, and that's what jazz is. I mean, I don't want this to turn into a completely negative kind of scene. I am aware that I'm working in a commercial world, and any musician will tell you that after 7 or 10 good years, there's going to be 10 years of drought, and then the thing will turn around again and things pick up, I've been fortunate, I think, to be in a very creative period, particularly the early 80s, I think were quite creative, on a fairly mass scale. That is, say, the King Crimson and Peter Gabriel and Laurie Anderson and David Byrne, with Talking Heads and all that. All those bands had albums that were selling 300,000-400,000 copies and were close to the American top 40. And that was a great period to be around. And since then, it's died down a lot, but I know it'll come back.
Well, tell me where you think Earthworks stands in the contemporary jazz scene. Where does it fit into the jazz puzzle?
It's quite a puzzle, isn't it? Well, we are, I suppose, what a marketing man would call acoustic fusion, I suppose. We don't have a guitar player. We are British. Now, there's the first thing. I mean, you say British jazz to almost anybody from North America, and they'll say Cleo Lane and John Dankworth. They don't know that Britain has any jazz, and I think they're generally unaware that Europe has any jazz. Now, if you go around to European jazz places like I do in the European jazz festivals, you'll be well aware that there is, in Europe, still very much a strong cutting edge of jazz that you're not hearing on North American radio. So in a way, the Europeans are a lot freer to play what they want to play than the Americans are. You understand? The Americans have this whole kind of Wynton Marsalis retro, jazz in a museum, jazz in a suit and tie type of thing, which, and the British are one of these nations that, since we don't have any jazz tradition really or rhythmic culture of our own, we do what we like with the stuff, I mean, my whole function is as a question mark. Is it jazz? Dick, question mark, Can you have electronic drums in jazz? Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but that's what Earthworks is for. Isn't it slightly weird having upright bass with electronic kick drum? Yes, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's what Earthworks is for. It's to try to ask questions, not answer them. Ask questions. Can British people swing? Well, heck, ask Django Bates. I mean, you swing your pants off. Can they improvise? Of course they can. What can British people bring to jazz? Well, they can bring a kind of wit, an intelligence to it. They can bring their folksy tradition through things like Up North, for example, which is a reference to the northern brass bands of English, the colliery brass bands of England. That's why that piece is called Up North. Sounds a little bit like one of those northern brass bands. So you're looking to your European musicians to tap upon their folk roots and use the basis of jazz, which is now an international sport, to exercise their wit and intelligence. And I think Americans particularly would do well to acknowledge that there is some interesting stuff coming from there. Jazz is secure. It's not a threat. Americans are behaving as though European jazz is a threat, which is a sure sign of a compliment, of course. Canada is different. I mean, it's no accident that we've been in Canadian jazz festivals. We've been playing Edmonton Jazz Festival, Saskatoon. A couple of years back, we did Vancouver, Victoria. We're here for the Montreal Jazz Festival and so forth. And the Canadians have a much broader, more European-style attitude to this. They're not so bothered by this, you know. They find the jazz from California very insipid, you know, as do the British from arias. So between Europe and Canada, somehow, we're in a stream there, you know. But so far, North America is fairly difficult for us because it's so mellow.
Let me throw an old quote at you that you said in the early 80s. You said, "I want to forget the 70s. I've got a couple of pictures on my wall, but that's all gone. Thank you very much." Yet here you are in the late 80s and early 90s with ABWH and Yes.
Oh, well, usually you bother for financial reasons. You get paid tons there. You get paid much too much, and it's great. And the reason it's great is money then allows you to do all kinds of other things, like supplying Django Bates with the fuzzbox, or selecting radio mics for Earthworks, or buying rehearsal time, or buying studio time. Musicians often nowadays, when the shit hits the fan, to use a proverbial colloquialism, are going to be working in two spheres. To survive, you're going to have to work in a couple of places. You know, if you're not working in studio music, you're working in movie music or jingles. And then jazz becomes what you do with that money. And that's very much my case. There's no doubt that ABWH and Yes have turned into a financial bonanza for me, which is absolutely great. There's no musical future in it, from my point of view. It's regressive music. I mean, it's historical stuff. But once in a while, I think a musician is allowed to go on vacation and make everybody very happy, playing all the stuff that they all wanted to play, you know, from 20 years ago. But it's nothing that I would give up my day job for, because my day job, which I know very well, is to play music that you don't know that you want yet, but you will want in 10 years' time. I know that. I know it because it's happened to me at least 3 times. Nobody wanted Yes, of course, when I was in Yes.
Well, how do you look back at the Yes Union album and tour? It really struck me that the entire situation was totally out of the hands of the musicians involved.
Oh, indeed so. It's totally out of hands of the musicians involved. Yes, you're quite right. It's put together by political people, record companies, people who stand to make more money than the musicians do. They'll put together a scenario, hey, let's go on tour for 4 months, make an album, boom, 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 boom. We, namely the politicians, will make a little bit more money than you will, but you will be able to make money and pay off all those debts that you've got yourself into, which is, on the whole, what happens in rock. Most of the musicians operate from a loss-making position, and they incur so much debt, they have to go on tour to pay off a debt, you understand? I exclude myself from this. Myself, I'm different. I don't have to go on tour to do that kind of stuff. I can simply take the money, make a lot of money, and use it on other things that I want to do. So that's pretty much how it works. I mean, there's a parallel that you could use with an actor like Sean Connery or someone. You know, he'll do some abysmal Hollywood movie where there is a cast of thousands and he's not, on the whole, asked his opinion and is told what to do. And then he'll go back and do the Royal Shakespeare Company, England or something, and get paid nothing and do what he wants to do. It's very common throughout the arts.
Well, yeah, Yes struck me as sort of a compromise. I never really imagined you playing sort of a secondary percussion role with Alan White. I mean, it really looked like you were having a hell of a lot more fun with ABWH when you were doing drums than you were on the Union tour.
Yeah, I was extremely underemployed. But what can I tell you? You know, 8 musicians all playing the same. I mean, there's no need for 8 people. So if the music requires just a little bit of icing on the cake from me, then that's what it gets, you know. I mean, there's nothing else I can do. I mean, if Alan's going to do what Alan does, then, and which is very fine and well and good, but there's no need for 2 of us, really. So I adopted the role of a kind of electronic percussion player.
Well, I've heard a rumor that Yes has switched from Arista to Victory. Is this true?
So I don't know. You probably know more than I do, you know. But I know they've been dropped by Arista. Yeah. Leaving Arista out of pocket, you know, millions of dollars. And we'll probably go to Victory, I suppose, which I don't think is going to be any great success. I think the unhappy thing about this, of course, is the imbalance. That on the one side, you're in a band. You know, I could throw a party in my house, right, with a dozen of my most intimate musical acquaintances. I would divide the room into 2 halves, and 6 people on one side of the room would be not millionaires, they'd be multi-millionaires, owning large portions of real estate and huge amounts of buildings and so forth. On the other half would be 6 so-called jazz players who have so little money they're practically begging on the street. And it is unnecessary to have such a stupid financial division between these types of music. But it is necessarily what will happen if accountants run the recording industry and stockholders run it. That is how it works. The stockholder must see a fast return on his investment.
Well, not to belabor the Yes thing, but I understand Steve Howe has left the band too. Is this true? Can you tell me who the current lineup is?
No, absolutely not. I have no idea who the current lineup is. And anyway, if you asked me today, it would be different tomorrow. So, you see a band like that when you see it. Nobody knows. It's what presumably it's what Chris Squire, Trevor Rabin, Steve Howe, and John Anderson can agree on. I don't think the keyboard players or the drummers have anything to do with it. You forget Kay, Wakeman, Bruford, White. You could probably forget them. They'll just turn up if you want them. But the guys who write the tunes and so forth, they have to decide what they want.
The acrimony between you and Chris Squire has been bounced back and forth in the press over and over again. But you want to talk about the origins of that?
Well, no, I mean, he represents pretty much everything I don't represent in music, He's a difficult guy. He's slow, pedantic, very politically orientated. Doesn't generate that much music, and he certainly doesn't generate it easily. It's all a long, drawn, slow process. So he's not my favorite musician to work with, no, but I can work with anybody, if I have to. Not my bass player of choice.
How do you feel about King Crimson reforming, and why aren't you in it?
Well, I don't know that it's reforming. I mean, I wouldn't hold your breath on that either. King Crimson is the kind of thing that never dies, and the reason it never dies is because it's a very good marketing idea. The minute a group breaks up, of course, the records are removed from the record shop. So the first rule of any musician's life is that you never break up and you never stop doing anything.
Adrian Ballou told me recently, he pretty much confirmed that King Crimson will happen and that you will not be involved.
Okay, well, that's fine. Thanks, Adrian. And the reason I'm not involved is because, of course, I'm a little difficult for Robert. Robert is better with sweet, smiling Americans who don't really know what he's talking about. Unfortunately, I know exactly what he's talking about, and I'm not invited.
Well, there's a lot of lore and legend about your time in Gong, and I was wondering if you actually recorded anything with the band, and what was your tenure with them?
Nothing at all. I was looking for a gig. I knew Mike Howlett, who's now a record producer, I think, New Zealand bass player. Their drummer, who was a guy called Laurie Allen, great guy actually, was busted in France and not allowed back in the country. They had a series of dates to do. At short notice, they needed a drummer, and I played with them for about 4 or 5 weeks. And then that was that. Yeah, that's it. 75 maybe.
Yeah, with every band you've been involved with in a major way, it's basically been 3 or 4 albums, and either you leave or the band breaks up. How long do you foresee Earthworks continuing?
Well, Earthworks has outlasted the bands that I've been in, but wait, we're only talking about one band that I formed, I think, Bruford probably. I mean, I'm not in control of King Crimson, that's when Robert wants to do it, evidently he does it, and when he doesn't, he doesn't. But yeah, there tends to be a natural life cycle. I mean, 3 albums takes 4 or 5 years, and it may well be that whatever 4 or 5 people have come together to do is done in 3 or 4 years or 5 years. Things change, and that's part of the point of music. It's good that we don't all get stuck. Isn't it good that we're not all the Beach Boys who are still hammering away doing the same things they were doing 25 years ago? That you pay me to go forward. I think that's the general idea. You look to me for interesting things on the drums. And if I can't do interesting things on the drums in a situation like Genesis or like Yes or something, then inevitably you move to the lower scale where you can do what you want.
Well, is there anything about Earthworks you want the public to know that, or consider that they haven't?
No, I think you've been very generous, and I'm sure the music will speak for itself. If you can't find CDs, please struggle to find them, and even order them at your local record store. If you can, because I assure you, if you want the band to stay together and you enjoy the music and you ever want to see the band again, it is CD sales that we need. These things are nearly charitable institutions at this level. Nobody obviously is here for the money. You're here for the music, and we want it to continue, but we can only have it continue if CDs are bought. So the best thing you can do if you like us is buy a CD.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time then.
Pleasure. Thank you.